5 minutes earlier, Buckingham Palace released a short announcement, but one powerful enough to send shockwaves across the entire Commonwealth. There were no familiar soothing phrases. There was no vague wording often seen in royal health bulletins. This time, the palace confirmed a serious turning point in King Charles' cancer battle. As the information appeared, the crowd in front of the palace gates fell instantly silent. Many people burst into tears. Yet in the middle of that chaotic moment, one chilling detail was quickly noticed. Queen Camilla was completely absent. No statement, no images, not a single sign that she was by the king's side. At Balmoral, the atmosphere was described as more tense than ever before. During the night, military helicopters repeatedly landed and took off in silence. Sources from the security sector revealed that encrypted calls were activated at exactly 3 in the morning. These calls are used only in emergency situations directly related to the line of succession. There was no press conference. There was no official schedule. Only the hurried movement of senior advisors and the familiar faces of the court appearing and disappearing behind the iron gates. Camilla's absence was no longer a private matter. It became a political question. Was this merely a personal reaction to an overwhelming shock, or a sign of a silent restructuring of power unfolding behind the scenes? In royal history, such gaps have never been accidental. The question now being whispered across Britain is clear. Is this the beginning of a new reign under King William, or the tragic ending that Princess Diana once warned about? If you believe William is ready to take the throne, leave comment number 1. If you believe this is a plan to remove Camilla from the center of power, leave comment number 2. That night at Balmoral began like many others in the long course of King Charles' treatment. There was no public schedule. There were no visitors. Only a carefully selected medical team and a fully sealed security perimeter at the highest level. But around midnight, the familiar silence of the Scottish estate was shattered by a signal no one expected. In internal records, it was noted with a short but haunting phrase, "The midnight bell." It was a call from the laboratory directly linked to the king's private medical team. The test results had just been completed. This was not a routine report. It was not a standard follow-up assessment. This result had been urgently requested after an abnormal sign appeared within the previous 24 hours. According to medical sources, just hours earlier, the indicators were still within controlled limits. The treatment protocol had not undergone any significant change. But this latest result completely overturned all prior assessments. The change was described as a 180-degree turn. Indicators that had once been stable now exceeded warning thresholds. A complication once considered a remote risk had clearly emerged. There was no longer time for academic debate. There was no room for cautious optimism. Within the internal classification system of the royal household, the king's health status was elevated to a special emergency level. This meant activating a chain of procedures not used since the days of Queen Elizabeth's final moments. The number later recalled by many in the security team was 15 minutes. 15 minutes was the time between the king's personal physician finishing the test results and the emergency call being placed to the highest level security line. This line is not used for ordinary medical matters. It is activated only when the monarch's condition may directly affect the continuity of the monarchy. Using this line means that all assumptions of stability must be reset from the beginning. Within those 15 minutes, critical decisions were made in silence. There were no meeting minutes. There were no official signatures. Only encrypted signals sent and confirmed through procedures standardized over decades. Senior advisors began to move. Some were awakened in the middle of the night. Others were instructed to remain in place but shift into absolute readiness. Balmoral was no longer a private retreat. It became the center of a potential crisis. The medical team concentrated all resources on a single goal: stabilizing the king's condition as quickly as possible. Backup treatment options were discussed. The worst-case scenarios were mentioned not to provoke panic, but to prepare. In moments like these, The language of medicine and the language of power begin to overlap. Every medical decision carries political consequences. Every passing minute is measured not only by heartbeats, but by the stability of the throne. Meanwhile, outside the treatment room, another silence was taking shape. It was the silence surrounding the role of Queen Camilla. By convention, in serious situations involving the monarch, the Queen is always present, whether in public or behind closed doors. That presence carries both symbolic and practical weight. Yet during the night at Balmoral, there was no official record of Camilla participating in the emergency decisions. No source confirmed her presence at the estate at the moment the bell rang. Some security personnel stated they received no instructions regarding the coordination of the Queen's movements. This was unusual. In previous situations, whether during Prince Philip's illness or Queen Elizabeth's final days, the role of the spouse was always clearly defined within the security system. This time, the absence was unexplained, and within the royal household, what is not explained often raises more questions than any official announcement. When the helicopter landed at Balmoral during the night, no list of passengers on the flight was released. But the signs suggested this was not merely a medical operation. The presence of constitutional advisors and senior security representatives indicated that a succession scenario had been placed on the table, even if no one dared to say it aloud. In the modern history of the British royal family, preparations for a transfer of power have always been carried out in parallel with efforts to preserve an image of stability. That night, these two currents collided directly. Those present at Balmoral described the prevailing feeling as prolonged tension. It was not immediate panic, but a low simmering pressure. Every incoming call had the potential to change the entire situation. Every medical update was awaited in silence. And amid all of this, the question of Camilla became increasingly clear in the minds of many, not because of personal curiosity, but because of her position within the current power structure. The Queen is not only the king's spouse, she is part of the system that represents continuity. Her presence or absence at a moment of crisis carries meaning far beyond private life. It relates to how the royal family wants the public to perceive the stability of the reign. When Camilla did not appear, that gap was immediately filled with speculation, and in a political environment as delicate as the British monarchy, speculation can become a dangerous force. Sources close to the palace said there was no internal statement clearly explaining the Queen's whereabouts that night. No one denied her absence, but no one confirmed a specific reason either. This created a rare gray zone in the normally tightly managed operations of the palace. That gray zone became even more striking when set against the background of the king's health entering its most sensitive phase since the diagnosis was announced. As dawn began to break over Balmoral, the medical crisis was temporarily brought under control. The king was stabilized, but what happened during the night could not be erased. The midnight bell activated not only emergency procedures, but also a chain of questions about power, roles, and preparation for the future. Those questions were not answered by press releases. They continued to exist quietly within the corridors of power. And amid the chaos of the medical team, amid the decisions made in those fateful 15 minutes, there was a power vacuum that no one dared to mention. The Queen was absent. The absence of Queen Camilla during the crisis night at Balmoral cannot be explained simply by scheduling issues or personal health. Within the power structure of the British monarchy, especially at a moment when the king faces serious risk, every absence carries meaning. To understand this, it is necessary to look more deeply into Camilla's psychological response, not only in the present but also in the past, where behavioral patterns have already appeared. According to internal sources, after the updated test results were delivered to those concerned, Camilla did not take part in any emergency exchanges. Instead, she withdrew into a separate space described as a closed room, where access was strictly limited. For 4 consecutive hours, no senior aide was able to make direct contact with the Queen. Calls went unanswered, Requests for updates were declined. This was not an impulsive reaction. It suggested a conscious choice, a controlled withdrawal. People who have worked closely with Camilla believe this is how she copes with crisis. When a situation moves beyond her control, she tends to retreat, separating herself from the flow of events in order to shape her own response. This is not new. In 1997, after the death of Princess Diana, Camilla also disappeared from public view for several days. At that time, she did not appear alongside Charles. She issued no statement. She did not take part in any ceremony related to the national mourning. That silence was heavily criticized. But psychologically, it reflected a familiar defensive mechanism. The similarity between these two moments has drawn the attention of many royal experts. In both cases, Camilla faced a turning point event. In 1997, it was the death of the woman, long seen as a shadow over her position. In the present, it is the risk of losing the king, the man who brought her from the margins into the center of power. Both situations placed Camilla in a state of personal vulnerability while under political scrutiny. During the 4 hours locked inside the closed room, according to one close source, Camilla did not request constant updates. She did not seek reassurance. The only thing she did was remain silent. This silence was not avoidance, but a form of delay. A delay in confronting decisions that could completely alter her position. In the royal family, time can sometimes be the most valuable asset. Those 4 hours gave Camilla space to consider, to prepare, and to control what could still be controlled. However, this choice also created a dangerous gap. When the queen does not appear, her symbolic power diminishes. While the medical and security teams were focused on the king's condition, others began to fill that gap with speculation. The question was no longer where Camilla was, but why she did not want to be seen. And in the historical context of Camilla's relationship with the British public, that question carried particular weight. Camilla has long been acutely aware of her own image. She understands that every action is measured against Diana. Her presence beside Charles is always examined through the lens of the past. For that reason, in moments of crisis, Camilla often chooses withdrawal rather than direct confrontation with public opinion. This time, however, the withdrawal did not take place only before the public, but also within the inner circle of power. That detail has raised suspicions that this was not simply an emotional reaction. Some sources suggest that during those 4 hours, Camilla was informed of preliminary discussions related to the possible activation of succession scenarios. While there has been no official confirmation, the presence of constitutional advisors at Balmoral during the night is a clear signal. For Camilla, this prospect was not only the fear of losing her husband, but also the risk of losing her role. When Charles is no longer able to exercise authority, the position of the queen becomes more fragile than ever. Camilla's silence, therefore, carries 2 layers of meaning. On the surface, it reflects personal pain and shock in the face of a serious medical crisis. At a deeper level, it represents a strategy of self-preservation. By not appearing, Camilla avoids being drawn into decisions whose outcomes she cannot control. She also avoids having her image linked to the worst-case scenarios, something that happened after the year 1997. However, this strategy is not without risk. Within the royal family, prolonged silence is often interpreted as a sign of weakness. When Camilla does not speak, others speak in her place. Advisors, anonymous sources, and eventually the media. With each passing hour without the Queen's appearance, the narrative surrounding her is increasingly shaped by others. In a moment when power is unstable, losing control of the narrative is particularly dangerous. By the time Camilla reappeared, 4 hours had already been enough to generate a wave of speculation. Parallels with her reaction after the death of Diana were raised again. Old questions resurfaced. Was Camilla repeating a behavioral pattern, Was this silence a sign that she was preparing for a scenario in which she would no longer occupy the center of power? No official answers were given, but within the royal family, the absence of denial can itself be seen as a form of acknowledgement. Camilla's silence, therefore, cannot be taken lightly. It reflects not only personal psychology, but also a signal of power. In the history of the British royal family, moments of silence like this have often foreshadowed an impending shift. This time is no exception. When Camilla chose withdrawal, she was not only confronting the pain of the present, but also the shadow of the past returning. A reminder that power within the monarchy has never been permanent. Camilla's silence was not only about pain, it was also preparation for an unavoidable confrontation when a confidential document was leaked. The emergence of the letter known informally among insiders as Thunder did not occur in a dramatic instant. It was not published. There was no announcement. There was no confirmation from the palace. The letter was simply mentioned within a series of private exchanges among senior advisors, then quietly spread like a slow-moving shockwave. That very silence is what made it dangerous. The letter is stored within the royal archives, where access is granted to only a very small group. According to investigative sources, this is not a fully formed legal document in the traditional sense. It does not take the form of a will. It is not an official decree. Its value lies elsewhere. It is a record that provides direction over power. Drafted at a moment when personal emotion and the fate of the monarchy intersected at the highest level. The number that caused many to pause was 1997. That was the year the letter was first written. The timing could not have been more sensitive. During the very week of Princess Diana's funeral, when Britain was still submerged in grief, when Charles was isolated amid public outrage, and when William, still very young at the time, first became aware of the true weight of the name he carried. According to what has been revealed, the letter does not contain only technical guidance regarding the possibility of a future regency. It also serves as a rare confession from Charles. In it, he acknowledged mistakes that had never before been made public, regrets related to Diana, concerns that he no longer possessed sufficient moral authority to serve as a unifying symbol for the nation, and most importantly, a cold assessment that William might be the only figure capable of preserving the continuity of the monarchy should the worst-case scenario occur. Royal experts argue that drafting such a document in the year 1997 was unprecedented. At that time, Charles had not ascended the throne. Queen Elizabeth was still reigning. Discussing regency for a subsequent generation, especially during a period of mourning, was considered taboo. But the shock of Diana's death shattered those boundaries. Charles understood that his public image had been severely damaged. He also understood that time was not on his side. The letter, therefore, was not merely an administrative document. It was a psychological will of power, a way for Charles to ensure that if he could not fulfill his role, William would be prepared from a very early stage. Sections of the letter refer to training, image shaping, and even protecting William from influences that Charles believed could damage the credibility of the throne. Among these, the relationship with Camilla was mentioned indirectly, but clearly. According to a source who had access to the letter's contents, Charles expressed concern that Camilla's presence in the future could become a source of division, particularly if the public never fully accepted her. He did not deny his personal feelings, but acknowledged that symbolically, Camilla could not replace Diana in the hearts of the people. This was a painful admission, and one that had never been disclosed before. For many years, the letter remained dormant in the archives. Very few people were aware of it. Yet its existence was maintained as a contingency. When Charles ascended the throne, the scenarios outlined in the letter were not activated. Everything appeared to follow a normal trajectory. That changed when the king's illness entered a stage that could no longer be ignored. At that point, documents once considered too sensitive suddenly became urgent. The leak of information about the letter was not accidental. According to investigative sources, It emerged precisely when Camilla's absence raised questions. When power hangs in suspension, any document that offers clarity becomes a weapon. The mention of a regency plan drafted decades earlier immediately altered the balance. It sent a clear message that the possibility of William taking over was not an impulsive reaction, but a carefully considered option long in preparation. For William, the existence of the letter is a double-edged blade. On one hand, it confirms his father's absolute trust. On the other, it places him at the center of a potential conflict with Camilla. If the letter is activated, the role of the Queen would be significantly reduced. She would no longer be a central figure within the power structure. This explains why Camilla's silence during the first hours of the crisis has been interpreted as a sign of caution. Those familiar with the relationship between William and Camilla believe the letter has exposed fractures that have existed for a long time. William has never concealed his absolute loyalty to his mother. Discovering that his father wrote down deep regrets immediately after Diana's funeral only reinforced that sentiment. For William, the letter is not only a plan of power, it is proof that the wounds of the past have never truly healed. When information about the letter began to circulate, even at the level of rumor, reactions within the royal family became more cautious than ever. No one confirmed it, but no one denied it either. This ambiguity allowed the letter to exist as an invisible entity of power. It influenced how different parties behaved. It shaped behind-the-scenes conversations. And most importantly, it altered the balance between William and Camilla. In royal history, documents like this are rarely brought into the light. They are designed to be used only in emergencies. Yet their mere existence is enough to generate pressure. The Thunder Letter does not need to be published in full, simply knowing that it exists, that it was written during one of the most painful moments of the monarchy, and that it places William at the center, is enough to shake foundations once thought unbreakable. When the letter is opened, even within a very small circle, it does more than determine the future of the throne. It also inadvertently pushes existing fractures between William and Camilla to their breaking point. On the morning after the night of crisis at Balmoral, a quiet but decisive development took place at Kensington Palace. There was no official announcement. No schedule was released in advance. Yet senior advisors in media, security, and constitutional affairs appeared one by one at different hours, sharing one common detail. They had been summoned directly by Prince William. This had not happened in such an open manner for many years. The meeting did not take the form of a routine consultation. William did not wait for direction from the central palace. He did not move through the usual diplomatic layers that traditionally define royal protocol. Instead, he stepped forward to coordinate directly. According to those present, William's demeanor was described as firm and cold. There were no opening courtesies, no reassuring remarks. From the outset, he focused on a single objective: controlling the narrative spreading outside. The shocking number in this meeting was 0. No ceremony. No diplomatic procedure. William bypassed all the customary processes designed to protect the traditional image of the monarchy. He demanded direct updates on every stream of information. He questioned potential media risks. And most importantly, he made decisions on the spot. For many in the room, this was the first time they had seen William act as someone ready to assume power, rather than an heir still in training. During the discussions, William did not mention Camilla. He also did not address the speculation surrounding the Queen's absence. This silence was not avoidance, but a deliberate choice. By keeping Camilla out of the center of the discussion, William quietly established a new order, an order in which decisions were based on the stability of the monarchy, not the personal position of any individual. It was within this context that the arrival of Princess Anne completely shifted the balance of power in the room. She came to Kensington without fanfare, without announcement, without a large entourage, yet her presence was immediately acknowledged. Anne did not speak at once. She listened, she observed, and when she did speak, No one interrupted. Princess Anne has long been regarded as one of the most quietly influential figures in the royal family. She does not seek public attention, but internally, her voice carries particular weight. As someone who understands both history and the less spoken mechanisms of power, Anne serves as a compass in moments of disorder. Her appearance alongside William in this private meeting was seen by many as a form of endorsement. According to investigative sources, Anne did not issue commands. She asked questions, short, direct, and difficult to avoid questions. She asked about the consistency of messaging. She asked about response scenarios if information about the letter from the archives continued to spread. And she asked how to protect William's standing in the eyes of the public without further damaging the image of King Charles. These questions forced advisors to think beyond immediate reactions. Anne's intervention also carried deep symbolic meaning. In royal history, she has always been seen as someone who places duty above emotion. Her alignment with William, even without public declaration, sent a clear signal that preparation for the future had entered a new phase. It also showed that William was not alone. He was supported by those who understood best the cost of power. Throughout the meeting, William displayed notable control. He did not appear rushed, but he did not hesitate either. Each decision was made with clear consideration of consequences. Emergency communication strategies were designed not to create drama, but to keep the narrative focused on the king's health and national stability. William emphasized that any sign of a power struggle must be extinguished from the very beginning. What surprised many people was the way William spoke about his father. There was no distance. There was no defensiveness. He acknowledged that King Charles' condition was serious, but he also emphasized that every action taken was intended to protect the honor and legacy of the king. This candor created a rare sense of trust. It showed that William understood the public no longer accepts vague messages. The presence of Princess Anne further reinforced this approach. She recalled lessons from the past, especially the mistakes in how the royal family handled the crisis in the year 1997. She did not mention Diana by name, but everyone in the room understood what she was referring to. The lack of transparency at that time left scars that lasted for decades. Anne stressed that this must not be repeated. After the meeting, no press release was issued from Kensington, but subtle changes began to appear. Media coverage became more consistent. Conflicting sources gradually disappeared. And the image of William, though he did not appear directly, became more visible than ever in the way the royal family responded to the crisis. This was a new form of power, the power of coordination rather than ceremony. While factions within the royal family continued to quietly compete for influence, the rise of William created a stabilizing axis. That axis was strengthened by the support of Princess Anne. And within the royal family, when Anne chooses to stand beside someone, it is rarely accidental. It reflects a long-term assessment of leadership ability and sense of responsibility. But just as this new order began to take shape, an unexpected element emerged. While strategies were being implemented and roles were being redefined, the central figure of the entire story had not yet spoken. King Charles, who had remained silent throughout the tense days, made a decision of his own. A decision taken without advisors, without a media script, a decision that was personal but carried enormous political weight. While factions were competing for influence, the main figure, King Charles, decided to step into the light with a final confession. King Charles' speech was announced only a few hours before it aired. There was no promotional campaign. There was no familiar introduction from the palace. Only a brief notice confirming that the king would speak directly to the nation. For long-time royal observers, this was enough to understand that this was not an ordinary address. It was a deeply personal decision, made in a context where every word could become a historical marker. When King Charles appeared, the first thing that drew attention was not the content, but the voice. It was slower, deeper, and carried a fatigue that could not be hidden. The king did not try to appear strong. He did not use ornate language. Instead, he spoke directly, as if understanding that the public no longer needed ceremonial reassurance. They needed the truth, even if it was difficult to hear. In the first 10 minutes, according to media figures, as many as 35 million people watched live, a number unprecedented for such a short royal address. Experts called it a somber record, as it reflected the level of anxiety and unease in British society at this moment. People did not watch out of curiosity. They watched because they felt that something irreversible was unfolding. Analysis of the speech revealed two key words repeated with notable frequency: continuity and stability. King Charles used these words deliberately. In royal language, these are foundational concepts. They speak not only of succession, but of national trust in institutions. When the king emphasized continuity, he was sending a message that even if personal health changes, the monarchy must endure. When he spoke of stability, he acknowledged that current instability was precisely why he had chosen to speak. What surprised many was the level of frankness in the king's confession. He did not avoid the issue of his health. He did not deny the rumors. Instead, he admitted that there were moments when he was no longer able to carry all responsibilities as fully as he wished. This was a rare admission in the history of the British monarchy, where the image of the sovereign is often built on steadfastness and endurance. The king also spoke about mistakes in the past, not in detail, not by naming names, but clearly enough for those who know the history to recognize them. He spoke of times when he placed personal emotion above duty. He spoke of the price that family and nation paid for those choices. This was the part that transformed the speech into a true confession, rather than merely a political message. Throughout the entire address, Charles did not mention Camilla. This absence was deliberate. By not including the Queen, he kept the focus on the relationship between the sovereign and the people. He also avoided placing her at the center of ongoing debates. For analysts, this was a protective move, but also a sign that Camilla's role in the coming period would no longer be as central as before. When speaking about the future, Charles shifted his tone. He referred to the next generation. He did not speak directly about abdication or immediate transfer of power, but he emphasized that preparation had been underway for a long time. He said that the responsibility of a king is not only to reign, but to ensure that a successor can take over under the best possible conditions. This was the point many connected directly to William, even though his name was not mentioned. In the way Charles chose his words, his caution was clear. He did not want to create the impression that the throne was being left vacant, but he also did not conceal the fact that power was being shared more than ever before. The concept of passing the torch was expressed indirectly, not through an official declaration, but through a shift in how the king spoke about his own role. The public reaction after the speech showed the depth of its impact. Rapid polls indicated that the majority of viewers appreciated the king's honesty, even as they remained concerned about the future. International media immediately began analyzing every sentence, not to look for mistakes, but to understand the next direction of the monarchy. The speech did not answer every question, but it established a new frame of reference, one in which vulnerability is acknowledged as part of responsibility. For William, the speech carried particular significance. It opened space for him to act without being seen as overstepping authority. When Charles spoke about continuity and stability, he was effectively assigning William a clear mission. Even without a written mandate, that mission was to ensure that any transition, regardless of its scale, would be controlled and transparent. This was a subtle form of delegation, consistent with tradition while still meeting the demands of the present era. Observers also noted the short duration of the speech, just 10 minutes. Within those 10 minutes, Charles said enough to shape the narrative, but not so much as to create new controversy. This reflected careful preparation. Every sentence was weighed. Every keyword served a purpose. The speech was not designed to provoke emotion, even though tears appeared. Its purpose was to establish a psychological foundation for what lies ahead. When the address ended, there was no question-and-answer session. There was no supplementary statement. The screen went dark, leaving behind a deliberate information vacuum. That vacuum forced both the public and political circles to reflect. It also allowed behind-the-scenes developments to continue without the pressure of immediate response. Inside the palace, the speech was viewed as the first step in a longer sequence of actions. It did not close the crisis. It only changed how the crisis was perceived. From a personal medical issue, it became a story about responsibility, succession, and preparation for the future. Not all cards have been revealed, but the board has been reset. The speech has ended, but the cards within the palace are only just beginning to be turned. Everything unfolding suggests that the British monarchy is facing its most serious storm since after the year 1997. At that time, the death of Princess Diana shook the trust of an entire nation. Today, it is the king's fragility and the secrets buried for decades that are pushing the monarchy into an unprecedented state of instability. Developments at Balmoral, the silence of the Queen, the quiet rise of William, and most notably the existence of a confidential letter all indicate that these are not random reactions. They are the result of a chain of preparations extending far into the past. The letter, drafted during the week of Diana's funeral, has now emerged as a guiding compass for current decisions. It connects Charles' unspoken regrets with the power scenarios that are gradually coming into view. In this context, every action taken by the monarchy carries dual meaning. It is both a response to a medical crisis and a strategic move for the future of the throne. We are witnessing history being rewritten through blood, tears, and secrets long buried. The throne has never felt colder, as the king's health and the queen's future both rest on a fragile line. If you wish to continue following the developments ahead, do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the royal decree expected to be announced next week.